Hello and welcome to another Creature tutorial. This tutorial is about rigging in Creature. Rigging is the process where you prepare a mesh and a skeleton for animation. Let's start off by adding the mesh regions into our rig. First, click on Add Region. I can either select the meshes manually or multi-select by holding down on the Apple command key and then selecting the meshes. So let's do that right now. Add the meshes into your scene. Okay, now the meshes are added into the scene, let's drag them around and place them at the right spot. In Creature, you have a couple of controls you can use to place and transform your meshes. You have the Translate command, which allows you to drag your regions around. You have the Rotate control, which allows you to rotate your meshes. And finally, you have your Scale control, which allows you to scale up and scale down your meshes. If you pull on one of the handles of the Scale control, you notice that it only scales in one dimension. This goes the same for the other handle, and if you pull on the center handle, it scales uniformly in all directions. Right, let's place the dinosaur head and scale it into place. Okay, we're done transforming the mesh regions. The next thing you should really do is to rename the mesh regions so they can be referenced much easily later on. So, click on one of the mesh regions and double-click and type in a new name. Let's do this for the rest of the mesh regions. Okay, now all the mesh regions have been renamed. We're ready to go on and create a skeleton. Let's start creating a skeleton for this mesh. First, click on the bone button. This switches to bone mode and we're ready to create our skeleton. To create a skeleton, start off by creating a bone. Click on Create. Move your mouse over to the location you want the first bone to be created. Hold it down and drag. There, that creates the first bone. Now let's do this for the rest of the skeleton. You notice that every time I create a new bone, it is parented under the previous bone. In the cases where you want to change a parent, you will click Select, pick the new bone that you want the parent to be, and then go back to Create again to create a new bone. Let's do this for the tail. Alright, we have the skeleton of the creature created. With the skeleton created, we're ready to move on to the final step of rigging, which is weighting. Weighting is the process where you tell Creature how much influence each bone has on each mesh region or all of the mesh regions. To do this, you have to enter weight mode. To enter weight mode, click on Weight. Welcome to weight mode. Let's start off with the most basic and direct mode, which is manual weighting. In manual weighting, what you do is you use the weighting tool like a paintbrush, and you go into the region you care about, hold down the mouse key to start painting the region. You notice that as I'm painting across the mesh region, it turns white. The reason is because the weight value is set to 1, which means that this mesh region over here is fully influenced by the current selected bone, this bone over here. I can also remove the weights by changing the weight values. In this case, I can set it back to 0, and if I paint over there again, this removes the weight values. Right. Now, the other thing you need to know about weighting is the affected regions option. Right now, if I go in and start painting, say, weights of 1.0 again over the dinosaur, you notice that I'm allowed to paint over the entire collection of dinosaur meshes. That's because the affected regions is set to all. Later on, we'll see why we need to change the affected regions to certain regions. But for now, let's just keep painting. Okay, once you're done weighting a single bone, we can test it out by clicking on Test. Click that. Now, if I drag this bone around, you notice that the entire collection of creature meshes is rotating and transforming with this bone. That's because we had just previously weighted all the meshes to the value of 1 through manual weighting. Manual weighting is great when you want to finesse weights specifically. However, most of the time, you probably want to just automatically smooth and assign weights based on each bone. In other words, it would be great if there was a way to tell Creature to automatically solve for all the weights on every single bone for each region, and you just come in and use a rig. Wouldn't that be extremely convenient? Yes, it is, and the mode you want to use is Auto. So click on Auto. So welcome to Auto Weighting mode. This is the mode where you tell Creature to automatically solve for and create weights for all your bones on your creature. And it's extremely easy to use. You just go in, look at the default options. By default, these options should be good enough. So you just go in and click Apply All, Apply to All. Right, and if you can switch different bones to observe how their weightings change based on different bones. So hold on the Shift key and then click on the bone you care about. You notice I'm switching through different bones and introspecting their weights right now. You notice that in this bone, there's quite a bit of weighting at the part where the bone lies, but then it slowly fades out to almost nothing at the end. This means that the mesh regions that are kind of far from this bone might not be influenced by it, and we might not get correct results. So the way to do it is to increase the influence. And let's try that again. Right, now you see the weight values are more evenly spread out. Now we can do some testing again. If I drag these bones around, you notice that the auto weighting tool has nicely weighted most of these bones. However, there are some problems. Click on the head bone and move it around. You see that? That's kind of bizarre, isn't it? The lower bone is trying to open the mouth, but for whatever reason, the mesh is getting dragged by both the lower bone and also somehow influenced by the top bone. If we go back to bone and go back to weighting mode again, the reason why this happens is because this bone over here has affected regions of all. In other words, when we did the auto weighting mode, the auto weighting solver made sure that this bone was influencing every single region, and that's not exactly what we want. What we want in this specific case is for this bone to only influence the upper head, and this bone to only influence the lower jaw. This is a very common mistake that people encounter during rigging. So in order to solve this problem, all we need to do is click on affected regions. And then we pick the mesh region we really care about, in this case upper head, and click select single. And then we switch over to the other bone, the lower jaw, and do the same thing. This time we say lower head. And once we're done with that, we click apply to all again, and watch what happens. Now the jaw is open and closed properly, just like how we expect. So in summary, if you have a rigging issue where certain bones are not exactly transforming the meshes correctly, please check your affected mesh regions. Chances are you either have all the regions selected or you have some region that shouldn't be in the affected regions list checked. So uncheck that and only check the regions you care about, and your rigs will look much, much better. And that's basically it for rigging. This concludes the rigging tutorial in Creature. Happy animating!